This is the very first drawing of this mythical city of Atlantis, and it was published in the very first English translation of Plato in 1928. And it shows 3 concentric circles of land and water. But what's weird is that there's actually a second image that's not so well known. It's this massive rectangular field, 2,000 by 3,000 stadia wide. And it's weird because, well, for most of history, Atlantis was just a location on a map, or a myth, or even a weird racial theory. But this is the publication that cemented Atlantis in our minds. And the second image is nowhere to be found. So what happened to this drawing? Well, the answer to this might actually explain why Atlantis has survived for over 2,000 years, and why it became really the most famous city in the history of humanity. But let's start from the very beginning. Because the very first description of Atlantis is all the way back in the year 360 BC. And we have Plato, the famous Greek philosopher. He talked about justice and love and reality. A lot of things that became the foundation for the way that we think in the Western world. But his favorite thing to talk about was this idea of an ideal society. So one day, he starts to write a story about this ancient city of Atlantis, which is this advanced, powerful civilization on an island somewhere in the Atlantic past the Pillars of Hercules, from which you could reach other islands and then a whole new continent. It's built on a hill carved into 3 concentric rings of land and water. It's overflowing with resources and minerals, hot and cold springs, brass, tin, and this strange material called orichalcum, and very impressive infrastructure that actually turned it into one of the most powerful economies in that time. But over generations, the rulers of Atlantis became corrupt. They launched a war against Athens, and they lose. And the gods, disgusted by their hubris, sink the island into the ocean, and Atlantis was lost forever. Most scholars agree that this is a morality tale. But there's a few things about the story that's kind of weird. First, Plato doesn't present it as a myth. He tells the story through a very specific chain of real people. An Egyptian priest tells it to Solon, who tells it to his grandson, who tells it to Critias, who tells it to Socrates. So he goes out of his way to make it sound like a real account. And then he doesn't finish it. Nobody knows why. And of course, there's the specifications. Detailed descriptions of the landscape, the architecture, with dimensions and materials. So that's the very first account of Atlantis. But then most of Plato's writing gets lost for about 2,000 years. But around the 1400s, Europe rediscovers Plato with some other classical texts, and this leads into the Renaissance. There's this massive cultural revolution, but especially for architecture, it's huge. See, before all of this, architects were more like medieval craftsmen. You learn by apprenticeship, and your entire work career is based on commissions from the church. But all of that was changing. Across Italy, powerful families were at war. The Medici in Florence, the Sforza in Milan, and the Montefeltro in Urbino. But not just with armies, but with culture. Each family was trying to prove their city was the most advanced and the most beautiful. So all of a sudden, there were private clients with big ambitions and big budgets. And with all these books from Plato talking about perfect forms and sacred geometry, something changed. All right. This is considered to be the very first resume. It was written in 1482 to the Duke of Milan. And it says, "I can design bridges, light and strong, that can be carried with ease. I can make covered chariots, safe and unassailable. I can design buildings, public and private, and conduct water from one place to another. And by the way, I can carry out sculpture in bronze, marble, or clay. And in painting, I can do as well as anyone. See, this isn't a craftsman applying for a job. This is a skilled architect, a polymath, selling himself. And he's offering to design an entire civilization. And you might have guessed it, it was written by Leonardo da Vinci to the Sforza family. But actually, another architect got the job. His name was Filarete, and he actually designed them a city from scratch. And he called it Sforzinda, the ultimate perfect city. A perfect star, radial streets, concentric rings. Sound familiar? Because they believed by using this ideal geometry, you could create the perfect society. They were kind of forgetting about the warning part of Atlantis. So all across Italy, architects are drawing these circles, and they call it the ideal city. And some actually got built. This is Palmanova. It was designed as a military garrison right in between these different empires. A 9-pointed star layout with a central piazza and radial streets and perfect symmetry. And this 9-point layout was genuinely effective for defense because you can create overlapping fields of fire. But nobody wanted to live there because, well, first, there was nothing much around it. There's no ports, no trade routes, and no real economic reason for it to exist. But the architects, they really believed that the geometry itself was so attractive that people would be dying to move there. But this elegant geometry, at street level, every direction kind of looks the same. So it might be a great fortress, but it was kind of a miserable place to live. In fact, the Republic has to start giving pardons to criminals and basically giving out free land for people to move there. So the first real residents of this ideal city are prisoners. But this obsession with creating this perfect city continued over centuries on paper and as real cities. By the way, all of the research and custom assets that we made for this video, you can check out on our website, which we built using Framer, who's also the sponsor of this video. Framer is a design tool that lets you iterate with precision and turn your design ideas into a live website in a single click. I think Atlantis, it has a very distinct visual language. So although it's gone through so many evolutions across different eras, we really wanted to tie it together with this abstraction of the ocean. Typically, to create a moving background like this, you would have to upload a video animation. But using the new shader feature, you can control the movement or color or gradients or the scale straight from the insert panel. The gradients even have a seed property you can scrub for endless variations. And they're always updating the library, so it's always growing with more tools. And this is what it looks like. And now you just click create web page, and that's it. It's live. You can very easily see how the design can adapt across different devices, and our whole team can build on the same project together in real time. You can find our research page linked in the description, along with a Framer link and a discount code if you want to check it out. You'll see how every age relates to Atlantis with the tools and obsessions they have at the time. But still, up to this point, Atlantis is still just an idea. Nobody's out there really looking for it until this. It was created by a Jesuit scholar called Athanasius Kircher in the 1660s. That's when Europeans are sailing everywhere and there's this obsession with cataloging everything. And nobody's more obsessed than him. He's kind of like a Leonardo da Vinci figure. He cataloged everything from volcanoes to Egyptian hieroglyphics to Chinese languages. He even descended into the crater of Vesuvius. But all of this had a goal. Trying to prove that the ancient Egyptian, Greek, and biblical sources all describe the same history of the big biblical flood. So when it came across Plato's descriptions of Atlantis, a story that actually came from an Egyptian priest, it kind of fit perfectly. So he drew it and gave it coordinates and published it. And on the map of the island, he drew a tiny circle. Now, 2 centuries later, another shape enters the story. Actually, many shapes and patterns and pyramids and artifacts and stories found across cultures, oceans apart. And this book explains all of the connections. It's written by an American congressman called Ignatius Donnelly, and it treats Atlantis as a historical fact, the origin of all civilization. Every culture, every myth, every language, all trace back to this one island. And it's a bestseller, because when you see these things side by side, the patterns are hard to ignore. But it was also just a very weird time for people. Just 10 years before this, they had found Troy, this place everyone thought was a myth. And 30 years before this, Darwin published his Origin of Species and basically proved evolution. And when you look at it side by side, this looks like science. Same kind of diagrams, same kind of comparisons, which is exactly why people believe it. So there was a kind of confidence that if you look hard enough, you can find anything. But imagine all this time believing you're this special creation from God, and all of a sudden you've descended from apes? It's disturbing, and people still needed an explanation for their existence. Now, this book reaches a Russian occultist called Helena Blavatsky, who unfolds all of this into a religion called Theosophy, which says we didn't evolve from apes. We're actually descendants of these ancient, powerful root races called the Atlanteans. And when I say we, I don't mean that literally, because it's only the Aryan race. But all of this was made to look like real science, largely thanks to these maps by a guy called William Scott Elliott, who was also a member of this religion, and he made them using this method called his psychic powers. And then in the 30s, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, founds a research institute with real funding and real expeditions. And he wants to send divers into the North Sea to find proof that the Aryan race descends from Atlantis. So that's the story of Atlantis up to this point. It's a morality tale, turned into a map, turned into a history, turned into a religion, and then turned into a weird racial theory. Nowhere in this 2,000-year plus history do we have this obsession that we have today. Because the modern obsession of Atlantis is a little bit different. Since all of this, we've actually found lost ancient advanced civilizations underwater, but we seem to be obsessed with one thing in particular, this image of the concentric circles. For example, this is the reshaped structure, which went viral a couple of years ago, and it's all the way out in Africa. It's a little far from Plato's original description, but it was covered by the media, and it convinced quite a few people that it was the real Atlantis, because the rings are in the same spot. Despite the scale being completely off, despite there being 0 artifacts, and it's 400 meters above sea level. And that region of Africa hasn't been underwater for 99 million years. And geologists pretty much agree that it's magma pushed up, which warped the rocks into a dome, and then erosion just stripped away the softer layers. But from here, when you overlay it with this diagram, it kind of looks believable. And this is the drawing that started all of this. Before these Nazi expeditions, in 1929, a scholar named R.G. Berry publishes a new English translation of Plato. But unlike some of these other characters, he's not trying to uncover the origin of humanity. He's a classicist. He's just translating the original classical texts into English. So he translates Timaeus and Critias, along with a handful of other Plato dialogues for the Loeb Classical Library. And to supplement the texts, he includes a diagram. This is the first one. 3 concentric circles of water and land with dimensions and a little description. The central island is 5 stadia in diameter with the sacred pillar and temple. And the second ring is 2 stadia wide with gardens and barracks, and you get the point. Then on the second diagram, he zooms out to show the outer city. The outer walls are about 9 kilometers from the center, and then he draws a thin line leading to the sea. So this is what the modern depictions of Atlantis will show. But in Barry's drawing, there's another canal. And on the third page, he zooms out even more. There's this massive rectangular field surrounded by mountains and rivers and lakes. It's 2,000 by 3,000 stadia, enclosed on all sides by the main canal, and it's intersected by 29 vertical and 19 horizontal cross trenches. So it's a massive irrigation system. The second canal wraps around the field and it feeds this agricultural field. So it's much more complex and much more interesting. But for some reason, this image completely disappeared. So why? You might have noticed that when you look at the history of Atlantis, every age relates to Atlantis with the tools and obsessions they have at the time. And today's obsession is the image. And not just an image, but a logo. Let me explain. In the last 20 years, Atlantis has gone from this story that people argue about to a shape that people can recognize instantly. You see the concentric rings on YouTube thumbnails or Netflix documentaries or AI reconstructions or conspiracy forums. You don't even need the word Atlantis. The rings are Atlantis, and I think that's the problem. So in the last few decades, we actually did find real sunken cities like Pavlopetri in southern Greece. It's about 5,000 years old, but there's a full town plan with buildings and a central square and a very sophisticated water management system with canals and drainage. And the streets are actually still intact, and it's sitting in just 4 meters of water. Then there's Thonis Heraklion. It's roughly 2,700 years old, meaning it was a living city during Plato's time. And it was one of the most powerful ports in the ancient world, because every foreign ship entering Egypt had to pass through it. And so far, they've only excavated about 5% of it. They don't match the exact timeline or the exact location, but these cities are everything Atlantis claims to be. Ancient, submerged, advanced, and they're real. But almost nobody talks about them. And I think it's because none of them look like this. And I think it's because a circle is not really a layout for a city, but it's something much more powerful. It's a logo. There's no beginning or an end. It's perfectly symmetrical, and it references the cosmic order. So a city made of concentric circles is a diagram of perfection. And maybe that's why the second canal disappeared. Because when you zoom out to the full image of Atlantis, the circle becomes tiny, and it stops being a thing. And a logo only works if it's the thing. So we kept the logo and threw away the blueprint. But by doing this, I think we missed something critical. And this image that we get is actually very misleading. Because when you cut those rings and look at the city from the side in section, it actually reveals the thing that Plato tried to hide. And we're gonna go through this in our next video, so stay tuned. Anyways, what do you guys think? Do you think Atlantis is real? Let me know in the comments. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.